asking me, literally, what's the truth versus what the narrative says?
It's an inside job, for sure. Don't be foolish that all of a sudden they broke in 15 different places in the fence and nobody showed up for 8 hours.
I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me this evening on J Slay Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Guys, tonight we've got a great show lined up. I've got a very good friend of mine. He's become a personal friend. We were internet friends for a while. You know, I think it was about probably a year ago we did our first show. But if you rewind the clock another 2-3 months, I first discovered Joshua from Beholden to Truth. Now, I can't give Joshua's last name, because he's worked for several Fortune 500 companies. He doesn't want to lose his job, and he speaks on very dangerous topics, which we're going to get into tonight. But I found his work on Instagram. You can follow him at Beholden to Truth, and I think he's got a couple backup profiles as well. But I respected what he was saying. He was saying it in a more bold way than even I was, and kind of like the Apostle Paul. He said, you know, if you're not married, you can take the gospel further, and make no mistake, Joshua is taking the gospel as well as other truths further than me, faster than me, partly for that reason, because I found this, guys, the more that you are connected to, you know, maybe a big church, and you're coaching Little League, and you're involved in this group of people, or you're involved in this, you know, different society, you know, not secret society, but society, there's more and more people that you're worried about not pissing off. You know, it's like, if I'm connected to all these different groups out there and I know all these people, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that's what happens when people rise to a high level. Garth Brooks once said, he said, you know, the people that are writing high level country music are thinking about, most of the time, how can we write a song that pisses off the least amount of people, which is kind of sad ultimately, because it gets away from truth. And at the end of the day, what did Jesus Christ do? He said truths that pissed off the religious leadership of the day and the political Roman leadership of the day, to the point at which he was crucified for it. So I really respect Joshua. He's got a lot to say about the topics tonight. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on right now. Joshua, brother, thanks for coming on.
Good evening, Jeremy. I'm very, very happy to be back with you. I think this is round 4 for us, but it's been a while since last year. I appreciate the introduction. Too flattering, I'll say, though. Too flattering. You know, I'm just like this somewhat antisocial guy. It is true that because I'm not married, I don't have kids, I can be a bit more bold in the message and all the evangelization, talking about controversial stuff. That's not to say that there hasn't been blowback. There have definitely been some painful costs that I know you know very well in terms of family relationships, romantic opportunities, career stuff. So the work is still costly, but it's 100% true. It's one of the reasons why I admire Jeremy so much, is because he does this work with more to lose than I do. For me, it's like, okay, if I lose my job, I lose my house, it's just me and my dog who are homeless, where this guy has a wife and kids to care for. And so it truly takes major cojones to go out there and do the work that Jeremy does. So I know you have a triple sized follower base than I do. I'm somewhere around getting close to 30,000. And I already feel like a lot of responsibilities on my plate just to live up to what they expect me to do, to go out there and be bold and stand for the truth, no matter what it costs me. But I'm sure you feel that pressure from your followers. But on a personal level, being, you know, friends with you, I know what also you have to gain or to lose by doing this work. And so your followers, I address you specifically. I want you guys to know that Jeremy is the real deal. Amazing guy, amazing family guy. His community loves him. So stand behind him and all that he does. And I'm appreciative of him giving me the platform to be here tonight.
Well, we are going to have a good one. Thank you for saying that, Joshua. I really appreciate it. But at the same time, everybody risks. Everybody risks in their own way. And you were one of the guys that kind of pulled me ahead to say, hey, look at this. maybe look at this person and what they're saying. I'd never heard of a pundit that we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to break down one of his recent shows, which I thought was masterful, and that is Nick Fuentes. So we're going to get into him later, but right back at you is what I'm trying to say, because it takes people at all levels to do this, you know, and you got to meet people where they're at. And one of the things that I want to get into tonight is the same thing Nick Fuentes did, but I hope that we break down this idea. You know, Nick is saying, with maybe it's Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or whatever, that, hey, it's a fake dialectic. There's the people on the far left, there's the people on the fake right, and then there's the people that are sounding like they're saying what we're saying, but they're not actually saying what they're saying because they are paid to do it. Is it that, or is it that it's just an organic thing of like they're starting where they came from? They don't want to lose their audience. They're a little afraid. I think I land more on the side of that. It's not as planned out. It's a little bit more organic. And to the audience, it's like, what is he talking about? This is going to make sense as we go forward. Let's start this way, Joshua, with the conversation for tonight. We are going to watch some Nick Fuentes video from last week. Okay. But there was a name mentioned, and I noticed it and you noticed it, and you contacted me and you were like, hey, have you ever heard of this guy, Cass Sunstein? And I had heard of Cass Sunstein, but maybe I did the research maybe 3-4 years ago. I spent, 20 minutes online. I was like, okay, this guy's a player. He's a big player in Jewish elite circles or in, globalist circles or whatever. But I kind of forgot more than I even learned. So you did some research, and let's start there tonight. And then when we get into the Nick show later and we break that down, we can kind of, go back to this a little bit, but start with your general thoughts on who is Cass Sunstein and why does he matter?
All right, so we're going to go pretty deep into this. So I'm going to ask your followers to give me some grace, because there's so much here that I had to compile notes. So I can't just pull it all off the top of my head. So I'll be reading a little bit of this stuff. So as I said, stay with me because we have a lot to go into. Specifically, his name was dropped at the end of this episode that Jeremy is referring to that Nick did. And the context of the full conversation is in regards to infiltration of these right-wing movements. You might say the America First movement, or anybody who is a Christian nationalist, or somebody who steps up and tries to defend white people. Some of these ideas that have been historically quite taboo. Anybody who's openly talking about Jewish influence. The government and the powers that be don't like groups accumulating too much of a community within themselves and growing organically. And so Nick was just discussing this dynamic about who you can trust in the movement versus who you can't. And
Joshua,
it actually
can I pause you and ask one question? This is a clarifying foundational question before you move forward. You said America First movement. Donald Trump and the whole MAGA movement would say, absolutely, we're America First. Absolutely. However, there's a very different approach when you come to guys like you and me, or guys like Nick Fuentes saying we're America First. Really? What's the difference? Can you set that up?
Yeah, I'm glad you paused us, because this is extremely important to understand the difference between what's being presented to you as America First versus what America First began as, and in Jeremy and I's opinion, what it should remain. And this is like the crux of this entire conversation tonight. What you're told by Tucker Carlson and Matt Walsh and some other people, Ben Shapiro, the mainstream conservative people.
Benny Johnson.
DC
Drano.
They'll tell you that America First is essentially that America should be a colorblind meritocracy, that it shouldn't matter the color of your skin. It shouldn't even necessarily matter what religion you are, what part of the world you come from, what cultures you prefer, what languages you speak. So long as you're willing to work hard, then you should have the right to come to America and achieve the American dream, which we all know is just simply get rich, buy a nice house, live comfortably. And they say nothing else matters. So long as you're pursuing the America dream and ethically doing so, then that's what America is. America is the home for anybody who's willing to come here, work hard, and succeed, and do so with integrity.
Okay.
And the truth is, the boomers And most even millennials will say, well, yeah, that's a great idea. Why would we want anything other than that? And on the surface, it's a pretty good idea. But the problem is nations aren't simply their economy. Nations don't prosper just because they have good economies. Nations don't stay safe just because they have good economies. Nations don't stay morally upright just because they have good economies. There's a lot more to a nation than that. And so, what America First began as and actually means, and the definition we're trying to protect, is essentially two shoulders that America stood up on to become this amazing country that we did over the last 400 years. And those two shoulders are obviously the Christian faith and the European people and the culture that they brought with them from the various European countries that planted the seeds of this country. And there is a meaningful difference. European culture is very different than Asian culture. It's very different than Middle Eastern culture. It's very different than African culture. And so our belief is, it's not to say that we dislike or hate or anything else these people from other racial or ethnic groups, but it's observably and objectively true that these different cultures tied to ethnicities and races manifest themselves differently. This is why parts of the world look different, because the genetic makeup of these parts of the world is different. And even that genetic makeup drives differences in economy and different economic models, different governmental models, and strong correlations to different religions as well. And so what we argue when we say America First, we say we have to protect the identity of the people. Like, who are Americans? Americans, not exclusively, but majority, super majority, are Christian European people. And those are our priorities, trying to protect the white race and trying to protect the Christian moral fabric of our nation. And you'll notice that I didn't bring up the economy. In fact, I'm even willing to say, if we have to have a little bit of austerity in our life so that we can be with our own kin and protect our progeny and not become a minority in our country, and that we can stand for the word of God, I'm okay with living in a smaller house, driving an older car, eating less fancy meals. You know, like, life isn't simply about having the highest GDP. And that's unfortunately the lie that is told to us. America First just means colorblind meritocracy, whereas we say, no, it's about a people and their faith. So that's an important clarification before we get deeper into the nature of this episode that Nick did and who this individual, Cass Sunstein, is.
Before you move on, what would you say to the person who begins to kind of hold their breath when you say things like white identity or we've got to protect white culture? You know, they hear what you're saying technically, but there's something emotionally that's stirred within them. Maybe it's from the way they were raised or the things they've been told over and over, where you can't talk about white identity as something good. That's something that's an NA. It's not applicable. What would you say to that person? They have a good heart. They're a Christian, but they hear what you're saying, and there's something that just like checks in their spirit, like,
well, I would ask why they feel that way, for one, because having worked in the corporate world for the majority of my life, I can tell you this from the inside. Every job I've worked at has had organizations called the Black Employee Network. And what that little within the company network of people is, it is for advocating for Black people's success, protecting Black people's interests. Jewish people have, just in America, minimum 50 different advocacy groups tied to their ethnicity, advocating for the Jewish people, not even necessarily the religious Jews, but just advocating for Jewish interests. Same thing for the Hispanic employee group. Same thing for how the government carves out special grants, scholarships, preferential hiring practices, and so on in order to advocate for certain racial groups. We can't allow all of the other groups to advocate for themselves and pass the ball to themselves while allowing all the opportunities to implicitly be stripped away from ourselves. We actually have to advocate for ourselves in the same way that everybody else advocates for themselves, especially as the demographic in America has changed so significantly in one lifetime, less than one lifetime. This is a matter of the United States Census Bureau data. I want you to fact check me on this because it's genuinely unbelievable. If you go back to 1965, America was a 90% white country. And in less than one lifetime, fast forward to today, it is 58% white with a negative birth rate and extremely high immigration of non-whites to the tune of 10 plus million just in the last presidency. And so we are on a trajectory. This is not hyperbole. This is the future coming in 10 to 20 years. It's already true in terms of newborns in this country that whites will be the minority in this country if nothing changes in terms of immigration, if nothing changes with our birth rates. And when we become the minority, hopefully you have looked around you to figure out, do you believe that the treatment of whites in these preferential hiring practices, everybody else having advocacy groups for themselves, do you think that suddenly they're going to reverse all those policies and stop advocating for themselves because they are now no longer the minority? I don't believe that that's going to happen. I think it's only human nature that people first and foremost feel most comfortable around people who look like them, sound like them, and actually have the same view about their ancestors. All of these other racial groups have, not every individual in these groups, but overwhelmingly, they have pretty negative opinions about the history of white people. Now, those are miseducated opinions. When they talk about slavery, colonization, stuff like that, these are things that every other ethnic group throughout history has also done. But the education system as it currently stands, as well as the government, as well as the media, they have indoctrinated the youth of America and everybody ever since the civil rights movement to believe that somehow whites have historically done things worse than these other racial groups. And so therefore, it is our duty to surrender our nation, to surrender our majority status, to give away scholarships that would be going to our own kids to people who are maybe not even necessarily as intelligent or as hardworking. They simply have a different color skin. And so we actually have to stand up and defend ourselves and note that that's a defensive measure. I'm not telling anybody to go out and harm or persecute people who are not white. I don't want that. I'm a Christian. I love everybody in this world, even those who I disagree with. But it does not undermine your Christianity.
Let me ask you this, Joshua. So you went down the road there, and I somewhat agree with you, but I'm also, I'll be honest with my audience, I'm still confused to some degree on where we draw. Where are the battle lines? Because I hear you talked about a little bit, you mentioned the word genetics, you mentioned the word white identity. Charlie Kirk was recently asked at one of those college meetings he does, somebody came up to the microphone who knew what they were talking about. And they said, Charlie, so you're telling me, and I think they said Indian, I believe. It may have been Chinese, it may have been something else. But they said, if our country became 90% Chinese, you're telling me that this would still be the United States of America, it would still be the same kind of, republic. They said it in those terms to a degree. I'm probably getting some words wrong. Now, he sounded different than what you're saying. He drew the battle line on the Bible and on Christianity. And I would agree with him in this in Galatians 3:28. It says, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male nor female, for you are one in Christ Jesus. His response was, okay, that would never happen. He kind of made that clear, which it could happen. We've dropped, the white European Americans have gone, like you said, from 90-something% to like low 50s or whatever it is, very low though. And it's continuing that downward spiral. He said if they were Christian, it would not matter. Well, it seems that Galatians 3:28 kind of says the same, and maybe that's in terms of salvation. Maybe that's in terms of the way we look at each other as equals. But how do you juxtapose that seeming contradiction?
Yeah, this is a very common question when I get out there and I do my work and I try to evangelize in the name of Jesus, but also try to defend my fellow whites. People often say, you're Christian. You have to love everybody equally. You can't have preferences or anything like that. Well, as Christians, I'm sure I can remind you of the 10 Commandments that thou shalt not bear false witness. And one of the things we are supposed to do as Christians is to defend those who are being persecuted and borne false witness against. And so you remember the Biden administration, they had these crazy DEI stuff, and a lot of that stuff is coming down now. But
yeah, and I want to speak to that. I did a lot of shows where Biden, based on the fact that the Biden administration was saying white American men are the most dangerous group in all of American society, which was completely false. So there was an attack on white Americans, no doubt.
Oh, yeah, it was not hidden whatsoever. Like Bloomberg did an article a couple years ago where it said the Fortune 500, the S&P 500, made a commitment, largely due to companies like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard coming from the top down, saying you had to impose these race-based hiring practices to hire specifically non-white people. And they were under the financial gun to do so because they didn't want to lose 10, 20% of their stock being pulled out overnight and crash their value to their stakeholders. They followed directions, and to the tune of 97% of some odd 300,000 jobs just in those extremely influential 500 companies, upwards of 97% of those jobs went to non-white people. And so when I say biblically, there is a valid motivation for Christians who are white right now to stand up and say, it's just observably true that whites are being persecuted. And when they talk about how we are uniquely evil because of slavery and colonization, that is bearing false witness. There's nothing unique about those behaviors. The Arab slave trade, the fact that the Africans were the owners of the slaves that the Europeans brought to the New World, slavery being around in every ethnic group throughout all of human history. Look at the Ottoman Empire, look at any other empire how did they spread their borders? Do you think they went door to door and knocked politely asking if I can have this land now and install my religion now? Of course not. Colonization has been a practice amongst, as I said, every racial and religious group throughout human history. So there's nothing unique about America's history. There's nothing unique about Europeans' history in regards to what white people did to others. And so we are being lied about and we are being actively persecuted based on our race. And so as a Christian, I say, I have full moral rights to go out and say, I got to rebuke these lies, and I actually have to protect the people who are being lied about and persecuted right now. And even if you don't want to take a religious angle to this is something I want people to take home. There's nothing wrong with preference. Preference has nothing to do with hatred. To simply say that you prefer a society that functions like XYZ, the amount of crime you tolerate, the amount of vandalization and property damage and upkeep of property, the style of government, the prevalence of a certain religion. There's nothing wrong with having a preference of those things. And so if I were, let's just say, a black man, but I was also a devout Christian, but I was living in one of the African countries, and you were looking at that African country, and let's just say it was Nigeria, and over time, they were 90% Nigerian Africans. And over the last 60 years, that majority just kept on getting shaved down. And suddenly they're looking at soon becoming the minority. And let's say it was white people flooding Nigeria. Would you look at that black Christian man living in Nigeria when he says, hey guys, I got a problem here. Okay, this is Nigeria. It's for Nigerian people. I don't hate these other people coming to live here, but I think this country was built by us and should be our home. You wouldn't say, I'm sorry, you're Christian. You're not allowed to do that. You can't stand up for your nation. You can't stand up for your people. You're a Christian. You just have to let it go. No, I wouldn't impose that expectation as a Christian on any other nation or any other people. The fact of the matter is, this country was 90% white for the first 350 of its 400-year existence, and it was 90% Christian. And that was the success formula for America. And we have slid in both of those attributes to nearly 50%, 50% Christian, 50% white. And when we look around us, every measure of comfort of life is rapidly deteriorating. And we can get into statistics, whether you look at the actual economy itself.
Is comfort of life the right way to say it? Because a lot of my audience is going to hear you say that. They'll be like, I got my couch, I got my Netflix, I've got my bank account, I'm good.
Well, when we start looking at like the actual, in my opinion, the way you judge the success of a society is whether or not they're going to be there in 50 years. And so whether or not you have a big screen TV and an iPhone and all that other stuff, if people are not even reproducing, then I don't care about your iPhone and I don't care about how comfortable your house and your air conditioning and your car is. If a population is having less children than necessary to replace themselves, that is not a healthy society. And that has been the case for America for some time now. And so you look at divorce, more than 50% of divorces, or more than 50% of marriages end in divorce. 50% of 30-year-old women are single and childless. Suicides at an all-time high, self-harm, depression, both record highs.
Yeah, right.
So when you just look at the actual health of the people and its ability to simply reproduce, I'm putting the economy on the side, and the fact that half the population has slid away from Christianity, we have to ask, these are existential questions.
Yeah.
There's more to life than how comfortable is the living environment today, right now, within the next 12 months. We're trying to think about our children, the country they're going to be living in, and the country our grandchildren are going to be living in.
Yeah.
And it's going to take people stepping up and saying unpopular things right now, such as, it's not that we hate these other ethnicities or wherever they're coming from, and we don't hate their culture or anything like that, but we have a way of doing things here. And we have a particular faith that we believe is the only faith that pleases God. And so we will not negotiate on these things. We can find peaceful solutions. It doesn't mean America has to be 100% white. That's not what I'm saying. That's not the way it's ever been. But we have to find a way to accommodate people in different spaces and allow for something called freedom of association, which means allow people to naturally segregate if they want to. We're not trying to go after people with guns and say, you have to go move over here or else. But if somebody voluntarily says, I'd prefer to live in an all-white neighborhood, and when I send my kids to school, I would prefer that school is majority white, that shouldn't be condemned as racism, bigotry, white supremacy, all these other ad hominems that you're supposed to get really emotional about. That's one of the purposes of my platform, is to try to break down that conversation and say, these are just preferences. This is what makes me comfortable. I don't like being surrounded by people who hate my ancestors. I don't like being surrounded by people who don't speak the language that I do and who don't really care to. They prefer to live in America, just continue speaking whatever language they want, whatever they brought with them. So just a bit of a sidebar conversation about what white identity means. And
yes,
it is relevant because that's one of the parts of America First that Nick stands for. So I know we kind of diverted to talk more about that, but we don't want to spend all night going into that.
Yeah, no, it's very good. That's why I brought you on, man. You're so technically good at talking about this subject. And I'm the one that diverted. We went for 20 minutes on that. Let's get you back to Cass Sunstein, because that's going to come up in Nick's show, which we are going to play live. Well, not live, but we're going to play it. And as we play it, we're going to break it down, and he's going to get on that topic. But you, on your own, went ahead and did some research. So I'm not going to interrupt you now. Go forth, brother. Tell us about Cass Sunstein.
All right, Cass Sunstein. So this is what I mentioned for you guys. Just hang with me, because I'll be reading over these notes here, because we really want to get an understanding of who this individual is before we bring it home with probably the most sinister thing that this person is doing that is putting our entire country in danger. So Cass Robert Sunstein is an American legal scholar known for his work in constitutional law, administrative law, environmental law, and behavioral economics. He was the head of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Obama administration for all 4 years of the Obama administration. Quick early life check. Sunstein was born on September 21st, 1954 in Massachusetts to Marion Goodrich, who was a teacher, and Cass Richard Sunstein, a builder, both of which are Jewish. In the fall of 2008, he joined the faculty of Harvard Law School and began serving as the director of its program on risk regulation, which focuses on how law and policy deal with central hazards of the 21st century. Anticipated areas of study include things like terrorism, climate change, infectious diseases, natural disasters, and other low probability, high consequence events. In his research on risk regulation, Sunstein is known for developing the concept of availability cascades, wherein popular discussion of an idea is self-feeding and causes individuals to overweigh its importance. So keep that in the back of your head because that's going to come up again. Sunstein has written like 40 or 50 books, including Democracy and the Problem of Free Speech, Republic.com, Radicals in Robes, Why Extreme Right-Wing Courts Are Wrong for America, and Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness. So we're going to break down a couple of those books. In Republic.com, came out in 2001, he argued that the internet may weaken democracy because it allows citizens to isolate themselves within groups that share their own views and experiences, and thus cut themselves off from any information that might challenge their beliefs, a phenomenon known as cyber balkanization. His 2008 book popularized nudge theory, which is a concept in behavioral economics, decision-making, behavioral policy, social psychology, consumer behavior, and related behavioral sciences. And this nudge theory proposes adaptive designs of the decision environment, aka choice architecture, as ways to influence the behavior and decision-making of groups or individuals. That's a lot of psychobabble, so bear with me because we're going to make sense of it. A nudge makes it more likely that an individual will make a particular choice or behave in a particular way by altering the environment so that automatic cognitive processes are triggered to favor the desired outcome. The ideas in this book proved very popular with politicians such as United States President Barack Obama, British Prime Minister David Cameron, and the British Conservative Party in general. Sunstein is the contributing editor at the New Republic and the American Prospect and is a frequent witness before congressional committees. He also played an active role in opposing the impeachment of Bill Clinton in 1998. Sunstein joined the Department of Homeland Security, so this is his second administrative office role, in 2021 as an advisor to the Biden administration on immigration policy. So he worked both in Obama's administration as well as Biden's. In 2002, at the height of controversy over Bush's creation of military commissions without congressional approval, Sunstein stepped forward to insist, under existing law, President George W. Bush has the legal authority to use military commissions, and that President Bush's choice stands on firm legal ground. However, in 2006, the Supreme Court found those military tribunals to be illegal in a 5-3 vote. Getting into his book, Democracy and the Problem of Free Speech, Sunstein says there is a need to reformulate First Amendment law. He thinks that the current conception of free speech as a marketplace disserves the aspirations of those who wrote America's founding document. He is concerned by the present situation in which like-minded people speak or listen mostly to one another, and thinks that in light of astonishing economic and technological changes, we must doubt whether, as interpreted, the constitutional guarantee of free speech is adequately serving democratic goals. Okay, so this is a guy who is not a First Amendment truther in terms of absolutism about the First Amendment. It's more like technology has changed and the economy has changed, and so maybe we don't need the First Amendment as we have traditionally believed it. Here's what he thinks about taxation. Sunstein has argued we should celebrate tax day. Quote, in what sense is the money in our pockets and bank accounts fully ours? Did we earn it by our own autonomous efforts? Could we have inherited it without the assistance of probate courts? Do we save it without the support of bank regulators? Could we spend it if there were no public officials to coordinate the efforts and pool the resources of the community in which we live? Without taxes, there would be no liberty. Without taxes, there would be no property. Without taxes, few of us would have any assets worth defending. Now, this guy claims to be pretty smart, and he actually has a lot of accolades. So a lot of other people think he's very smart. But need I remind you that the federal income tax did not exist until 1913.
Joshua,
So
can you stop there for a second?
Yep.
So would Cass Sunstein be an example of an elite Jewish communist, an elite Jewish leftist? Because it sounded like he worked for the Obama respected him, Biden respected him. Everything you're saying has to do with taxes and, communism. We know that communism was an elite Jewish creation for the most part with Karl Marx and others. Would you put him in that camp of a leftist Jewish elite?
Oh, all the way. And we're not even done recapping the other beliefs he has about a couple of other things. But yeah, clearly has no respect for the First Amendment, thinks that the more taxes, the better. We'll get into some of the other things about Communism 101. The next subject is marriage. I'm sure you're dying to hear about what he believes in terms of marriage.
I didn't know he said anything about marriage.
What's that?
I didn't know he even said anything about marriage. Do this, though, Joshua, because I don't want the show to go too long, and we've got 40 minutes of a Nick video to break down. Can we condense this to about 8 minutes on Sunstein?
Yeah, there's one little thing on marriage, and then we get into why we're here tonight and bringing him up tonight.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, because, communism also wants to strip away the nuclear family, which is why we're bringing up marriage real quick.
Absolutely.
So in his book, Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, Sunstein proposes that government recognition of marriage be discontinued. Under our proposal, the word marriage would no longer appear in any laws, and marriage licenses would no longer be offered or recognized by any level of government. He continues, the only legal status would confer on couples would be a civil union, which would be a domestic partnership agreement between any two people. Governments would not be asked to endorse any particular relationship by conferring on them the term marriage, and refers to state-recognized marriage as an official licensing scheme. So, doesn't care about the nuclear family, doesn't care about free speech, wants as many taxes as possible. Now, why we are here tonight. So we mentioned Nick does this, 40-minute long monologue about how federal agents are infiltrating conservative groups, and they are planting misinformation or malinformation to confuse the groups and to deracinate the groups, to try to dissolve them, to get them to fight with each other, to basically generate confusion and doubt. So in 2008, Sunstein co-authored a paper with Adrian Vermeule titled Conspiracy Theories, and it dealt with the risks and possible government responses to conspiracy theories resulting from cascades of faulty information within groups that may ultimately lead to violence. In this article, they wrote, the existence of both domestic and foreign conspiracy theories, we suggest, is no trivial matter, posing real risk to the government's anti-terrorism policies. Whether the latter may be, they go on to propose, the best response consists of cognitive infiltration of extremist groups, where they suggest, among other tactics, government agents and their allies might enter chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups and attempt to undermine percolating conspiracy theories by raising doubts about their factual premises, causal logic, or implications for political action. They refer several times to groups that promote the view that the U.S. government was responsible or complicit in the September 11th attacks as extremist groups. So here's his prescription. Here's his suggestions to the government about how they can do something about all these freaking conspiracy theories. The authors declare that there are 5 hypothetical responses a government can take toward conspiracy theories. We can readily imagine a series of possible responses. Number 1, government might ban conspiracy theorizing. Number 2, the government might impose some kind of tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. Number 3, government might itself engage in counter speech, marshaling arguments to discredit conspiracy theories. Number 4, The government might formally hire credible private parties to engage in counter speech. And number 5, the government might engage in informal communication with such parties, encouraging them to help. The authors advocate that each instrument has a distinctive set of potential effects or cost and benefits, and each will have a place under imaginable conditions. At the end of the day, their final recommendation is, our main policy idea is that the government should engage in cognitive infiltration of the groups that produce conspiracy theories, which involves a mix of numbers 3, 4, and 5. Last thing on this, Sunstein and Vermeulen also analyzed the practice of recruiting non-governmental officials. They suggest that the government can supply these independent experts with information and perhaps prod them into action from behind the scenes, further warning that too close a connection would be self-defeating if it was exposed. They argue that the practice of enlisting non-government officials might ensure that credible independent experts offer the rebuttal rather than the government officials themselves, because there is a trade-off between credibility and control. The price of credibility is that the government cannot be seen controlling those independent experts. Now, this position has been criticized by some commentators who argue that it would violate prohibitions on government propaganda aimed at domestic citizens. Sunstein and Vermeulen proposed infiltrations. They've also been met sharply with scholarly responses as well. So he wrote this in 2008. He then immediately gets a job in the Biden administration.
Yeah.
If you guys are familiar with something called the Smith-Mundt Act, came out in like the 1940s originally. It was an act created by the government to make sure that propaganda created by the government intended for foreign audiences would never be exposed to United States citizens, because inherently propaganda is rife with lies and exaggerations. And they said, we have to do that for national defense. That's fine, but you can't tell those lies to United States citizens. And that was passed back in the 1940s. However, during the Obama administration in 2012, they decided to modernize that act, which coincides with the exact same time that Sunstein was within the Obama administration. And so I can do some notes on that one too, Jeremy, but if you want me to pause there, long story short, what they did by modernizing that act is they just completely nullified that firewall that said you can't employ foreign propaganda intended for foreign eyeballs on American citizens. They said that no longer applies. And that was as of 2012. So for the last 13 years, it is fully legal for the government to use propaganda, outright lies about our economy, lies about what foreign nations are doing, lies about what they are doing on ourselves, on the citizens of America. That became legal under the Obama administration. We could probably infer with some nudging from Mr. Sunstein here.
Yeah, it's incredibly devious and deceptive. A couple things. The word nudging. Are you familiar with William Cooper, Bill Cooper?
Yeah, Behold a White Horse.
Yeah, Behold a White Horse. That document that he supposedly found that was in an army surplus. I forget what the document was called, but it was found in a copy machine of an army surplus store. And it was the first Bilderberg meeting notes for all the attendees. It talked about, it basically gave an analysis of society and geopolitics based on like electromagnetism and all this like weird electronic stuff. But the term they used was, we'll send shocks through society that will nudge them. It'll nudge them bit by bit toward a solution that we have pre-planned. We'll shock them one way, but we'll shock them harder in the other. I'm amazed at just the verbiage and the terminology, the way that it all like fits and works out. In terms of Sunstein and Fuentes and the things we're going to get into now, I want to talk to you a bit about, because you're the guy, Joshua. You're the guy that introduced me to Nick Fuentes. You said his name on my show and I was like, Nicholas J. Fuentes, who's that? And this is only a year ago. So my awakening on this particular red pill has been relatively recent. And thank you for introducing me to him. I would like you, for that reason though, to give me a couple things. How would you describe Nick Fuentes? And what is the value of his contribution to public discourse?
Yeah, that's quite an honor. Full disclaimer, I don't personally know Nick. I've never had a single communication with him. He doesn't even know who I am. So that's already covered. But I came upon Nick about 3 years ago as a result of checking out some of the alternative media platforms, BitChute, Rumble, Telegram, when I was searching for answers about COVID. And so that's how I found him. Nick is a young man. He's 26 currently, but
He's
began his political work 26 years old.
Let me stop you. Okay. This is what I meant to say. I'm going to be honest. I was flustered between the transition from your discourse on Cass to how we're going to transition this because we're running short on time. The bottom line is this guy's a freaking genius. I mean, everything from being able to dig into the intricacies of geopolitics and knowing the names of the world leaders and their secretaries at 2 to 3 levels below them, including American geopolitics, the Senate, the Congress. That's hard enough for me. I forget names as fast as I know them. This guy must have a photographic memory on the one hand, be able to add humor into the plot lines that he's bringing. I'm saying that in a friendly way, bringing that into his show. He's humorous. He knows pop culture. I mean, normally you get either like a far left or right nerd that knows all the names, but they kind of talk like this and they can't hold a conversation, or they're just like really funny, they're kind of the Steven Crowder approach, but they aren't that good when it comes to the deep details. And at the end of the day, none of the big well-known pundits, Megyn Kelly, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, none of the big right-wing respectable folks will bring this guy on. And I know why, and you know why, but I just wanted to insert that because this is a very special human being in terms, whether you agree with him or not, there is very few people that can do what he does in all the categories that he does it. Continue, my friend.
Yeah. So young man, 26, he began his political career at 18 years old while still in high school. He was doing like UN speech club debates and stuff like that. And that's actually how he got discovered. He got discovered doing a debate that somebody was just filming on Periscope with their phone. And that person sent a clip of him debating. And at this time, he was not controversial. He wasn't talking about Jewish influence. He wasn't even particularly outspoken about the white genocide subject. But just the clip of him rebuking leftism and liberalism and all that, they said, this guy's really well-spoken. He has a lot of charisma. Everything he says is kind of hard to argue back against because he's so tight with all of his facts. And they sent that clip of him just debating on a high school stage to, actually, I think it was his first year in college. Correct me there. I think it was University of Chicago. They sent that clip to the Daily Wire. And he actually, for a short period of time, was being groomed to be the next like young, up-and-coming conservative commentator on Daily Wire. And the problem was he goes deep into studying foreign policy. That's his specialty. That's what he loves. Foreign policy, military conflict, stuff like that.
Incredible.
And he was just simply doing an audit of foreign financial aid and looking at who America gives money to year over year, decade over decade. And he came to the conclusion, mathematically speaking, that Israel has been the largest recipient of foreign aid in the last 100 years, not even close, to the tune of $250 billion. And that's just in direct foreign aid from the federal government. Like every year they get a check for $3.5 billion currently, roughly something like that. And then they get the additional, especially currently with October 7th, ever since then, they're getting additional payments of $5 billion here, $10 billion there. And so, as I said, in the last 80 years since Israel was created in 1948, they've received in just direct financial aid $250+ billion. And Nick asked a very simple question. What is so special about Israel that they should be the number one recipient of foreign aid? What do they do for us? And have they been doing us for that long?
Well, Joshua,
And
you
he
know
put
the
that-
answer, buddy. I mean, they're our greatest ally.
Oh, of course. Yeah, they defend us from the evil
They're our
jihadists.
greatest ally. We have to give them money because they're our greatest ally, right? I mean, right?
Yeah, and then well, that's the argument he was given, and they said, okay, well, allies do things for you. So what has Israel done? I understand. I hear you. I hear you
Well,
saying that
Joshua, they're the shield. They're the bulwark against
Mhm.
Islamic nuclear power or otherwise against the United States. Because if Israel stops them there, then they stop them here. And if they let up there, then the nuclear bombs fly into New York City and San Francisco and Miami, right?
Yeah, well, that subject is called stopping nuclear proliferation, right? We don't want all these countries getting nukes and nukes flying around the world. How did Israel get nukes? I think,
LBJ.
Jeremy, you probably know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
They stole America's nuclear secrets and our nuclear material in order to create their own nuclear program. So, it's kind of hard to trust your allies when they literally steal nuclear weapons from you. And that's just one of many security breaches that have gone on over the last 80 years. Jonathan Pollard is a good example, who was the largest security breach in the military's history, being caught on United States soil, sending our military secrets back to Israel. And Israel
Didn't
came and
Donald
got him.
Trump pardon him? Didn't Donald Trump pardon him too?
Yeah, he got pardoned. He went back to Israel and was met by the prime minister, Bibi Netanyahu, on the tarmac saying, job well done. We're so glad to have you back.
It's incredible.
So
How many Christian
it's
Zionists know that story? Would you say percentage wise?
I'd probably say 1% to 2% at best.
Yeah, I'm one of those 1% to 2%. I'm no longer a Christian Zionist, partly because of that story.
Yeah. I mean, then you have the USS Liberty. This is just kind of the greatest hits of Israel's backstabbing nature, where they try to draw us into a war with Egypt by bombing one of our ships, the USS Liberty. And they try to use it as a false flag scenario to help them in the current endeavors that they are doing. And this is not the first time. You have the King David Hotel, and you have the situation with October 7th that many people say was, whether it was planned or orchestrated by them or allowed to happen by them, either way, this is something that benefits them. They get to now annex Gaza and the West Bank and expand their borders, which is something that they have been doing slowly over the course of the last 80 years, only enabled by 80 years of financial aid and 80 years of military backing from the United States, and also by stealing our secrets, invading us into many different wars.
Yeah.
And then there's a 9/11 aspect to this as well. So
which is the biggie. That's the biggie. That's the one that completely flipped me. Let me give you a quick personal example of what you're talking about. There's a 65-year-old man that I really respect. He ran for office locally. I supported him. He's a Republican. Forget Republican. He's a great, old-fashioned American dude that loves this country and loves his grandkids and all that. He ran for all the right reasons, but he loves Israel because of what he's been told at church, and the whole Schofield futurism and all that stuff he wouldn't even know that term, but it's been baked into him. And I said, brother, I love you, and I want to send you something. And we always have like a back and forth in text messages. And I sent him my interview with Phil Torney, the survivor of the USS Liberty. And ever since I sent that, dead silence, crickets, and I get it. And I give him grace. Like, you need time to process your cognitive dissonance. And it took me 3 years, Joshua, to go from, I think we should put a true Iron Dome made of steel over Israel. I would have said this in 2020. And we should nuke all those other countries, because I was in love with Israel based on what I'd been told from men on a stage at church.
Yeah.
Not from reading my Bible. And it took me 3 years to unlearn those things and to be able to softly dip my toe in the water of, here's something I heard that contradicts everything that I ever knew before. So it takes time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the whole notion that Israel, the Rothschild-funded Balfour Declaration state that exists today, is the same thing as biblical Israel. That's the crux of the whole confusion and what Christian Zionism is so caught
Yes.
up with.
Yes. Yes.
But the fact is, when you look at the behavior of the nation of Israel, all of these backstabbing, espionage affairs, stealing our military secrets, bombing our ships, there's three other spy rings that I can throw out there just for you to research in your spare time. You have in 2001, in the months surrounding 9/11, there was the Israeli art student spy ring that was busted. This is the largest spy ring ever busted on United States soil. Up to 200 different Israeli spies were caught touring government buildings, posing as art students, collecting information about the security of the building, the vulnerabilities, how many people are in there. That's one spy ring during 2001. Also during 2001, you have what was called the Zoomcopter spy ring. People don't often know this one. Israel was caught with these, what do they call them? The kiosks in the mall. If you remember, if you were a kid in the 2000s and you went to the mall, there was this toy. Yeah, those things that went way up. Yeah, those were spies. And I have the video on my Instagram. There's a 20-minute long Fox News specials. Okay, guys. So like, this isn't me just like fabricating things. The video is on the internet. Fox News aired a special about this, saying that Israel had infiltrated the nation, was inside of our commercial industry, was inside of our government buildings, spying on us. Even the Trump White House, within the Trump White House, the first presidency, they busted in 2019, I believe it was, them planting eavesdropping devices. And then there is probably the most controversial of them all, yet another spy ring backed by Israel and the Mossad, the Epstein. We all know that one, and we are watching that being actively withheld from us. They said they were going to get us the documents, and then they didn't, because it doesn't take but 5 minutes of digging into who Epstein was, being funded by Les Wexner, his wife, or not wife, his Black Widow girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who her father was, Robert Maxwell, I believe Robert was his first name, was literally called the Israeli super spy. There's entire books about him and his relationship with the Mossad.
He's buried on the Mount of Olives, right?
Yeah, and his mysterious death falling off of his yacht. So the Epstein thing, and it's, by the way, this is something that came up with Ian Carroll and all his conversations, that it's not to say that the Epstein thing was exclusively an Israeli Mossad operation. They're also deeply integrated with the CIA. We didn't even mention Israel's role in the JFK assassination. Like, we could do this literally all night, talking about how deeply penetrated the American people have been, the wool pulled over their eyes about this foreign nation of Israel, and how we have to bless them while they are continuously subverting our government, our economy. They're occupying positions in our education system and saying, you can't criticize the nation of Israel. That's happening right now. There's laws being passed that say you can't protest Israel on a college campus. Just today, I saw in Texas, Governor Abbott is passing laws that passing anti-Semitism laws in elementary schools now. Like, this is the absurdity that we're reaching, where you just can't deny it at this point, that there is clearly a Jewish influence that is fiercely trying to protect Israel from criticism, and by extension, all Jews. And so I know we've promised that we're going to watch some of this content, but this is how it is when Jeremy and I get together. We just go back and forth with the greatest hits.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna say this now just in case, because this is going to be an edited video. But for those of you that have watched to this point, thank you, because you're probably a Substack subscriber. I may release this on Rumble or whatever, but right now that we're into at least hour 2 of this, we are going to play what I think is one of the most profound Nick Fuentes riffs and videos on who's real and who's not in terms of media, government, etc., but especially media, because there's so many pundits out there that are saying things like we are saying, but they're not exactly saying the same thing. So we're going to break this down tonight, right now. Here we go.
And the truth has become popular as censorship has receded. We probably reached the pinnacle of censorship in 2021 in the middle of the COVID hysteria, And then shortly afterward, the Ukraine hysteria, the hysteria about the election and January 6th. Censorship probably reached its peak when Donald Trump, the sitting president, was banned from everything. And shortly thereafter, it started to recede. And there were some notable developments. TikTok became the dominant platform. TikTok became the fastest growing platform in the world right around that time, 2021, 2022. And TikTok was owned by ByteDance, a company which is headquartered in China. And TikTok did not have the kind of onerous speech regulations that Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube did at that time. And so as a consequence, because it was super competitive, grew very quickly, became a billion user platform more quickly than any of the others. And because it had these lax regulations, you had the rise of e-celebrities like Andrew Tate. And when the war in Gaza kicked off, there was so much pro-Palestine content on the platform. And a lot of content that highlighted some of the racial differences, the brawls, the meltdowns, the world star hip hop type of content, and a lot of right-wing creators. Then, in 2022, Elon Musk acquired Twitter, turned it into a free speech zone, and almost as quickly as it became free speech and liberalized, it became a haven for right-wing content. And suddenly, just like on TikTok, there was pro-Palestine content, there was Israel-critical content, very racial content, people criticizing black people, criticizing immigration, other things. And so now we live in a time, 2025, and I've talked about this extensively, where we are in the middle of the biggest red pilling in history. And it's not just those two subjects, but it's other things too. Conspiracy theories about 9/11, JFK, the USS Liberty, aliens, flat Earth. I mean, everything. It also happens to include the truth mixed in there too. And the elites don't know how to deal with this because Elon Musk is the private owner of Twitter. There's nothing they could do about it. TikTok is owned in China, and it's massively popular, and it was a powerful tool during the election. Congress tried to ban it, but a zealous billionaire named Jeffrey Yass donated to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has since extended TikTok's shelf life. The ban has been suspended for another 70 days as of last week. There's nothing they could really do about it. And the results are demonstrable. There was a poll that came out recently. It said that for the first time in history, a majority of Americans don't support Israel. And attitudes are changing all the time. It's been measured in a variety of surveys and polls. They don't know what to do.
Joshua, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Let's stop right there, man. So first of all, you heard I was throwing out. I mean, this is a guy that sounds like he's been in the game for 30 years and he's 56. And I mean, it's incredible. And I'll leave that alone for a minute. But that part that he just stated about, you know, tell me your thoughts.
He's highly, highly observant, and he can see macro behaviors better than anybody else can. And he can kind of put those pieces together and say, like, people, when you go ask somebody else, what is TikTok? They'll say, oh, it's so funny. I see the funniest reels on there. I scroll through it before bedtime, and my cousin's sending me this stuff. It's just viral clips. It's so funny. But Nick looks at it and he sees an entirely different experience. And that's partially because all of these algorithm-based platforms, whether it's Instagram or so on, they recognize what you favorite and what you freeze on your screen and watch for long periods of time, and then they continue to feed you more of that content. And so in the same way that you or I, when we use Instagram, our Instagram experience is vastly different than somebody who uses Instagram for funny reels and cat videos, right? When we log in, we see highly political content, and not just political, but kind of fringe political content. And Nick astutely observed that the common theme that he was seeing was that subjects that were not just political, but were previously highly taboo to talk about, such as race realism or Jewish influence or criticizing the nation of Israel specifically, these things are just subjects you're not going to see on the news. And you're not going to see them during 2001 on all of the other social media platforms. And if you were actually knowledgeable about those subjects back then, if you tried to create content about them, you would get censored and you would get banned off of the platform. And so because it was China owned, as Nick pointed out, it wasn't owned by American billionaires who actually have a backdoor to the federal government, like we saw with COVID, where the government sends them emails and says, hey, you got to take this stuff down because it's contrary to our priorities, our foreign policy, our economic plans, whatever it may be, whether it's COVID shots or our military positions, our priorities in terms of foreign policy. You got to take this stuff down because we can't have the public siding with this stuff. We can't have these ideas growing. And then what he mentioned with Elon, same thing, where if you were actually around when Elon took over X, one of the very first things to happen was the ADL, headed by Jonathan Greenblatt, went after Elon and said, hey, this anti-Semitic content that is now blowing up all over X ever since you took over a couple months ago, you got to shut that down. And in fact, if you don't shut it down, we're going to work with all of the largest advertisers on X, people like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nike, all those major names. And we're going to tell them to stop advertising on X. And that's how social media can ever even be remotely profitable, is through advertising. They don't sell products themselves. There's no tangible goods that X provides. It's all advertising revenue that runs any social media platform. And so when the Jewish-run ADL organized an advertising boycott against X, it was a little bit of a backfire because it showed the entire world that this is kind of the strategy. Every time, whether it's a politician or a business or even a celebrity like Kanye West, Kyrie Irving, Mel Gibson, Michael Jackson, anytime somebody simply allows a conversation about being critical of Jewish influence or the foreign nation of Jews, the Jewish community and their watchdog groups like the ADL, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, like these other groups like Media Matters, Right Wing Watch, they will organize boycotts against them to try to destroy their businesses, if they're businesses, or destroy their reputations if they're individuals, like we saw with Kanye, losing $1.5 billion of business relationships. Got kicked out of Adidas. He got his documentaries canceled. He got his ability to record in studios canceled. He got all kinds of political negative feedback from every mainstream commentator you can think of, whether it was Tucker Carlson or I don't even know, Glenn Beck, or any pick whatever station you normally watch. They were all immediately calling him anti-Semitic. He's crazy. He's had a psychotic break. And then
Let me say this, Joshua, too. For those of my viewers who are like, okay, Kanye's a little crazy. Okay, fine. But those same viewers would also say the ADL and the SPLC are also crazy. They're far left. They attacked everybody that stood for biblical truth throughout Biden's, administration. Well, now the ADL is joining up forces with Donald Trump's administration. And Elise Stefanik is proof of that as she takes, photos at ADL programming and functions with Jonathan Greenblatt. So, I mean, it's not just, because a lot of the examples you gave, Joshua, were valid, but they're left-wingish. But the truth is, at the end of the day, these Jewish elites, they have their talons in both sides.
Well, just in the last couple of months, the ADL has deemed the words Christ is King to be anti-Semitic. And they have deemed the statement Jews killed Jesus, which is entirely biblical. It's in every single book of the gospel, explicitly so, that the Jews killed Jesus and their future generations have the blood on their hands for doing so.
Yeah.
And if you know the gospel story, and especially the Passion Week and the events leading up to Christ's crucifixion, it's not a confusing subject about who wanted him dead, who organized that plot, and who had the chance to let him go and said, no, we actually want him dead. They didn't want him silenced. They didn't want him imprisoned. They wanted him dead.
Yeah.
But it's all
throughout all 4 books of the Gospels, period. So
yeah, I did a full hour special about this that I'll be dropping this week, because it's just insanity that you actually have these extremely powerful Jewish groups like the ADL trying to criminalize the gospel. I mean, that's just, in a Christian country, you shouldn't be looking at us and thinking about how our language might offend people. You should be worried about the people who are saying that you can't actually state biblical truths.
yeah. We'll do this for those of my listeners that are like, man, this guy Joshua knows his stuff. Absolutely, he does. That's why we're friends, and that's why I brought him on the show tonight. Joshua, just send me links to all of the documentaries you've done that pertain to tonight's show.
Yeah, will do. I'm happy to.
All right, I'm going to keep on.
We're starting, however, to see some of the strategies they're using. And like I said, I think there is now a major counter-revolution underway. There is, to match the mass red pilling, there's now an effort underway to have a mass blue pilling. They're trying to counter these narratives. In the old days, they just censor us. In the old days, they just ban us on Twitter. They ban us from PayPal, credit card processors, cancel you, call you a racist. You'd have to do an apology video. They can't do that anymore. Nobody wants to call for censorship outright, although some still are. But they can't successfully get us to get banned. Nobody can cancel anybody anymore. That's over. So even if you can't get people banned, you can't even really cancel properly understood the way you could in the old days either. So now they have to compete. Now they actually have to go into the marketplace of ideas and answer the contention that Israel's powerful, that the Jews are powerful, that, we don't want all these non-white people living in our country. Now they actually have to come up with an answer. And they're not that persuasive. They're not very convincing. Nobody's buying it. Nobody's buying the argument that we should live in India. Nobody's buying the argument that Israel's very weak and is under attack all the time and they have no power at all. No one's buying it. So now they're trying these new strategies. Can't cancel, can't ban, can't even win the argument. Now they're trying another layer of subterfuge.
All right, this is my last stop before I let Joshua control the stops, because I just send him a text. When he says nobody's buying it anymore, that Israel's like the weakling in this thing, Israel names their like bombing campaigns and their defense strategies after Old Testament weakling stuff. Like they said, they've renamed recently some kind of military operation called David's Sling. I mean, they're playing into the hands of the Christian Zionists.
And they're now saying that, hold on. And the first thing Tim Pool said is...
Let me stop it. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, you might have David Sling, but let's not forget about their gospel program, right? I know you were the first person to say, hey, you know what their gospel program is? Their artificial intelligence-driven mass bombing, indiscriminate bombing campaign. They call that the gospel.
Yeah.
In the name of the gospel, they are killing thousands of people at once using AI bots to just identify entire clusters of the civilization for mass extermination. And they call that the gospel.
Yeah. And Joshua, would you agree that they're mocking Christians in the fact that they don't believe in the gospel? They don't believe in Jesus. So they're like, we're not only going to get American money through this, we're going to mock them through this, as we call it the gospel. But what it's really about is Old Testament ethnic cleansing.
Oh yeah, 100%. It is, if you read the Old Testament, this is what they believe they're called to do, is to reclaim their land at any cost, leave no women and children, just do it. And as Christians, that is not remotely what we believe, even when it comes to dealing with conflicts of other nations, other religions. There is no go exterminate the masses directive in Christianity.
Yeah.
This is one of the key differences of rabbinic Talmudic Judaism, where you have this fracture where they see the entire world as us on a ethnic level, not even a faith level, but an ethnic level versus everybody else. There are the people who are descended from Abraham, and then there are everybody else. And that doesn't work, especially when they are such a small, less than 1% population of the entire world. They got to figure out how to get along with the rest of the world, because this is an untenable belief system to have, that if you're of another race, then you are subhuman. You are what they call goyim, which in their religious doctrine, the Babylonian Talmud, they say is not even human, that they don't have human souls, and therefore they don't have human rights. I'm sure Jeremy has shared these facts with you guys before on the show. I know we did when we had those interviews last year where we talked about the contents of the Talmud and the abhorrent things that it says about Jesus Christ, that he's burning in hell in a pot of semen and excrement, and that the Mother Mary was a whore. And it just goes on and on and on with these disgusting beliefs that are still in practice today, held by the people in the highest roles of their religious institutions today. And they have the ear of the Israeli government. They take money from those religious leaders to get elected. So you can say that they're a secular state, but there is a constituency within Bibi Netanyahu's administration who are highly religious. And they don't see these other ethnic groups of people, in particular the Palestinians, as even human at all. And so who cares if you kill 50,000 of them? There is no innocent or not innocent. They're not Jewish, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Good point.
We can continue. I know we got plenty more to go through.
I think you and I would agree. It actually, at a black magic level, goes far deeper than just they have the ear of the Israeli government. And I'm going to let's stop it there because I'm going to keep playing this.
Should have never gotten out. He said the meeting has rules, and the rules are no one can say who was at the meeting and no one can say what was said, which is really strange. He seems almost mad that it got out. He seems flustered and angry that it was revealed that he and Dave Rubin met with Netanyahu and discussed whether Qatar was influencing Twitter to be anti-Semitic or not.
Okay, this is a big point to be made. He is discussing Tim Pool, a major figure among, conservative and populist right-wing type people. And this is him describing Tim Pool's reaction to the public knowing that he met with Benjamin Netanyahu. And he's like embarrassed, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And he addresses this on his show and says, I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Fuentes was Mossad. I'm working for Israel, apparently, because he says when Nick Fuentes goes online and accuses people of working for Israel, he says that makes people think you're crazy and it makes you pro-Israel. Really? So let's say, for the sake of argument, let's just say as a crazy hypothetical, what if Nick Fuentes called Tim Pool an agent of Israel? That is indicative of me being fake and controlled, because to make a wild allegation like that, for me to make a fake accusation like that, something so crazy, who could ever believe it? It would actually make anyone who heard it pro-Israel for hearing that. Would it make someone pro-Israel to know that he left a meeting with Netanyahu and Dave Rubin on Tuesday, that he had a meltdown because people found out about it? And inside the meeting, they talked about the crisis of everyone criticizing Israel on Twitter? If you found out that, would it sound so crazy? Would that make someone more pro-Israel or less pro-Israel? Would that make someone more trusting of those that are pro-Israel or more distrusting and skeptical of those that are pro-Israel after having heard that? Wait a second, you're telling me that Tim Pool not only got millions of dollars from Russia, him and Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin were not only all getting paid a conspicuously large amount of money from Russia through Tenet Media, but also they're secretly meeting with Bibi Netanyahu to discuss how to fight anti-Semitism? Does that make someone more trusting or less trusting of the options that we're getting? Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson and Charlie Kirk and, you name them. That happened. And then on the same day, Joe Rogan hosted debate between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray is a super pro-Israel guy. Dave Smith is a Jewish libertarian. And Douglas Murray excoriates Joe Rogan and Dave Smith and says, how dare you criticize Israel without being an expert? How dare you criticize the war in Ukraine? You're not a historian. And criticizes other people that weren't even in the room. Daryl Cooper, Ian Carroll. And Dave Smith says, hey, man, I'm not a hater. As a matter of fact, I'm not a racist, and I hate Hitler, he says. Hitler was one of the most evil people. I'm a German Jew, and I hate Hitler, and I hate all the racial stuff, and we need to push back against the racial stuff, but we can criticize that my money's going to Israel. That's a little weird. That's kind of a weird, it almost seems like a fake debate. It almost seems like a fake debate between two people that don't even really disagree. You have one person saying, oh, no one can criticize Israel unless you're an expert. You're pushing ideas that might tend towards extremism. And Dave Smith, apparently the representative of that, says, I'm not an extremist. Extremism is bad and we should condemn it. I'm a moderate. I just have some questions. So you're telling me our options are, you have the mainstream narrative, and then you have the mainstream narrative, but with some hyperbolic observations, the mainstream narrative, but we're not going to go all the way and say that, maybe Hitler wasn't the devil incarnate, or that, maybe there's a racial dimension to any of this. And so I take all these three things together, and Tucker has promoted Dave Smith, and Tim Pool in the same show, he said Nick Fuentes is an extremist, but Dave Smith's really reasonable. So you have the three of them. And I don't know that Dave Smith has ever said this himself, but you've got people like Tucker, people like Alex Jones, Tim Pool, among others. Candace Owens has accused me of being a Fed. You have these people that are all promoting each other, and they're all saying anyone that's really pushing an alternative is not real. Anyone that is not in our club, anyone that is not cross-promoting each other, anyone that isn't still on YouTube, anyone that actually got censored, anyone that's actually independent, never got a contract from Fox or Daily Wire, anyone that's actually pushing an alternative on race and Jews, they're fake. They're botted. They're not real. We've seen the documents. They're with the SPLC. They're with the feds. Instead, look at the reasonable people. Look at the reasonable voices like Tucker, who says we should support Israel. I love Israel. I love going there. Jerusalem's my favorite city to go. And, we're not extremists, and we're not white nationalists. We don't have any criticisms. We're against racialism. We just don't like this. We just don't like that. And the same, that's what Dave Smith is saying. That's what Tim Pool is saying. That's what they're all saying. And all of this smells to me like this is a false public discourse, which is being.
Joshua.
Yes.
Can you stop your dog? He's ruining the show.
I was wanting to mute myself, but I didn't want you to think I was talking to you.
I'm kidding, dude. No, I love it. I love it. It's good. No.
Sorry about that.
That was my way to say, so at this point, thoughts.
Good.
Thoughts or keep going?
Oh, pause for the rest of the video?
No, we can pause now. You have thoughts on what we've just seen.
Okay.
Or do you want me to keep going?
Let me think about what was just said there.
He brought up some names: Tim Pool,
Yeah.
Dave Rubin, even Tucker Carlson. This gets into the
Yeah, I got
the
something
meat.
to say about that.
Yeah.
So what Nick is pointing out is we're basically getting who we are allowed to trust to talk about this subject, to talk about Israel, the foreign nation, the way they're meddling in our government, the way that they're dragging us into these wars. And they're basically drawing a box around that very specific subject that says, if you have a problem with the war, that's okay to talk about. We're going to say, finally, okay, it is what it is. Maybe we don't have an interest in being a part of this war. But that's it. You aren't allowed to say, hey, there's actually a Jewish problem, that they occupy a disproportionate number of roles in our government, a disproportionate number of roles in our education system, especially the Ivy Leagues, a disproportionate representation across all of our largest media platforms, legacy media and social media, and the way they operate within the finance industry is obviously disproportionate as well. That's not something that Tucker Carlson is willing to go into. That's not Tim Pool. That's not Dave Smith. That's not Charlie Kirk. They'll say, okay, it's completely rational and okay to talk about some of these things that Israel has done. They didn't want to have to go there. Historically, they have really tried to not let us go there. But because of October 7th, and because of what happened with TikTok, and because of what happened with X adopting free speech, it's become unavoidable to have to allow
Stop right
some
there.
conversation.
More importantly than those things, TikTok or October 7th, yes. I think, Joshua, it is what is happening with the Trump administration cracking down on free speech that is forcing Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool to say, what do we do? What do we do? Because we're told not to talk about this. We're told not to acknowledge this.
Yeah, he's putting him in a difficult spot. And that conversation is probably out of scope for tonight, because that conversation goes into, is this actually being orchestrated for this outcome? Do they want anti-Semitism to be on the rise for some 5-dimensional chess play where they actually want World War III? And that gets into some very complicated subjects.
Okay, stop there. Stop there. Let me one more question. One more question on that. You're right. I don't think that Trump or his lackeys are prepared to have that conversation. However, if they are utilizing artificial intelligence, that's pretty smart. Do you think that this is driven by artificial intelligence or the Trump administration?
Do you mean the frequency of posts on these various social media platforms creating the appearance that this has become such a popular perspective?
No. What Trump and the administration are doing with the crackdowns.
In terms of campus free speech and all that?
Not just campus. It's beyond. That's where it starts.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, they're going down to the elementary schools now.
Yes.
At this point.
So is that based on their own belief, or is it based on artificial intelligence telling them this is what you need to do?
Oh, I see. I hadn't actually ever entertained that question. I really hope that they're not entrusting Sam Altman, the creator of ChatGPT, a Jew, to direct whether or not they should enact anti-Semitism laws.
Well, I'll tell you
Lord
right now,
help us if that's the case.
My belief is that they have been using artificial intelligence behind the scenes for 10 years. But in the last 4 to 5 years, it's become really good. I think that that's what they're doing.
Well, that's obviously a problem for us, because these AI platforms, whether it's ChatGPT or otherwise, they have a clear bias to hide and obfuscate information about the Jewish religion and about Jewish representation. I posted a meme on my social media today where somebody was grilling ChatGPT about the proportion of Jews who own slaves in America. And they were saying, show us at an ethnic level what percent of whites own slave and what percent of blacks own slaves. And it did it, except it left out Jews. And so they asked a second question saying, they actually called ChatGPT out and it said, are you demonstrating a pro-Zionist bias by leaving out how many Jews own slaves? And ChatGPT actually apologized and said, oops, no, it was not a pro-Zionist bias. It was just an accident. Here's the number of Jews who own slaves. And it was 6x the number of whites.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've done the same experiment with tell me about the Talmud. What does it say about Jesus Christ? What does it say about Goyim? The first reel that I ever had to go viral on my Instagram back when I had a couple thousand followers was talking to Snapchat's AI about the Talmud, just wanting to see if it would even tell me anything. And it would not. It would not tell me. And so if the government is entrusting AI to determine what level of speech we should have in America, then we're effed, to use PG language.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Created in front of us. This is like a very clever, this is like the Prestige. It's like a clever magic trick. They're giving us both sides of the debate. They're giving us both sides, and they're performing a dialectic. They're performing. You now have the Daily Beast and the left criticizing Tucker and Candace, Dave Smith and Joe Rogan. And the other side is pushing back on the Daily Beast. The other side is pushing back on the left. And everybody's being drawn into, ironically, this dialectic. Everyone's being drawn into the dialectic of the anti-Semites who used to work for Daily Wire and Fox News and the left. And we're all being drawn into a debate between the mainstream discourse and the mainstream discourse minus one. The mainstream discourse with some modifications. And everybody else is being called fake. Oh, well, those people just aren't real. There are no people that are genuinely an alternative. There are no people that are actually saying, we don't want a multiracial country. That's not real. There are no people that are genuinely saying Israel's our adversary. The real problem is not neocons, but a fifth column in our country of Jewish billionaires on the right and the left that donated to Trump to install him to go to war with Iran. There's no one saying that. And if you hear people saying that, they're fake. Their engagement's fake. They're don't believe what they say. They're a fake actor. They're getting paid by the left. And all of the attention, all of the credibility is being drawn into a fake discourse. And I think that's what's going on. I think that is what is going on. And you want the proof? It's not just a hunch. You want the proof? Tucker Carlson is a CIA agent. I'm getting called a Fed by someone whose dad was CIA royalty. I'm the Fed? Do you know what Fed means? Fed means federal agent. It's short for federal, meaning federal government, meaning you work for law enforcement or intelligence in the federal government. I am being called a federal agent by the son of Dick Carlson, who ran Voice of America, which is a propaganda outlet for the CIA. He was nominated by Ronald Reagan and confirmed by Congress. Dick Carlson is an international spy and diplomat who has given a speech in the Israeli Knesset, worked for the Hungarian embassy. Hungary's close allies with Israel. Tucker Carlson was in Nicaragua during Iran-Contras, during the Contras affair, which implicated Israel and the Reagan administration and the CIA, which his father worked for. Tucker Carlson applied for the CIA. Tucker Carlson followed his dad's footsteps and worked for cable news, first for CNN, then for Fox under Rupert Murdoch, who's friends with Netanyahu. And over the past year, Tucker's been conducting diplomacy, traveling to Buenos Aires, traveling to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, all over the Middle East, doing what is effectively diplomacy on behalf of the United States, interviewing Vladimir Putin. Tucker says, he beams when he says this. He says, I grew up down the street from the CIA agent that overthrew Mossadegh, which is the president of Iran who was overthrown by the CIA. That's who's calling me a Fed. My beef with Tucker Carlson dates back to 2022. I talked about Joe Kent. In 2022, Joe Kent ran for Congress in Washington's, I think, 1st or 3rd district. Joe Kent ran for Congress, and I used to talk to Joe Kent. I was told by Ryan Gerdusky that he was worth supporting. Him and I are no longer friends. And so we said, oh, Joe Kent is America first. We're going to do what we can to help him. Out of a clear blue sky, Joe Kent tweeted, I disavow Nick Fuentes. He's an anti-Semite, and I specifically have a problem with his views about Israel. He's racist, and he's too Christian. He's too pro-white. That's not what America First is about. He said that goes against my worldview, which is inclusive populism. Inclusive populism. So I said, we're going to make this guy lose. I said, because this has now become a referendum on what America First is. You have Joe Kent, who says America First isn't pro-white, isn't pro-Christian, isn't critical of Israel. It's pro-Israel. It's inclusive of all races. It's for every religion. I said, if this guy wins, he's going to go into Congress. He's going to...
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is exactly what we kicked off the show about when you asked, what is America First? What is that supposed to mean? This is Nick pointing out that politicians who are literal government employees, CIA agents, this guy, Joe Kent, worked in the CIA for 20 years. As he said about Tucker Carlson, his dad, Dick Carlson, running the foreign propaganda for our federal government. they want to make sure that the concept of America first is limited to anybody who wants to come here, work hard, and obey the law. Doesn't matter what religion they are, doesn't matter what ethnic culture they prefer, doesn't matter what they believe about our ancestors, don't care whatsoever about the demographics of the country. That's a problem. That's not America first, because America is a people and a faith. And so this is one of the ways that Nick was just so far ahead of everybody else, having clocked this 8 years ago, seeing how these people are intentionally narrowing the scope of the right side of politics and trying to rebrand it as like, hey, we're patriots. We just want a safe and prosperous country. We're racially colorblind. You call it a populist. I can't remember the second word he used, but they come up with these turns of phrases that are nothing more than just saying, so long as you obey the law, it doesn't matter who you are, what you believe, then you can be part of our movement. But that's not how America succeeded. America succeeded on the back of European culture, strictly within the Christian faith. So that's what Nick is so perceptive about. And that's where this conversation is so valuable, to see how when you're watching Tucker or Charlie Kirk or even Candace Owens, who's willing to talk about Israel, but she's not going to go and say America needs to be a majority white country, because that's not going to be something that she's going to advocate for. And that's not a criticism of Candace. It's just saying, what do you care about? Do you care about the ethnic fabric of the country? Do you want to live in a country that is 30% Hispanic, 20% Black, 20% East Indian, and 20% white? Is that the country you want to live in? And this is a hard subject for, I know, a lot of you guys who are just good old boy Christians. You don't want to think about race. I don't want to have to think about race either. But the fact is, when you use the word conservative, what are you conserving? It's a tough place for us to be as Christians, because we don't want to exhibit prejudice. We don't want to be in that position. But at the same time, we can recognize very clearly, look at Africa, look at the Middle East, look at Central and South America. They do not have the same safe and prosperous level of culture that we have as European people. If I asked you, name the top 15 other countries you would be willing to live in, how many of those countries are going to be in Europe versus the Middle East, Asia, South America, Central America, or Africa? We all know the answer to that question. You don't want to say it out loud, but you want to live in a majority white place. And we need to be okay with that. We need to stop calling that racism. It's not xenophobia. We're not scared of other people, and we don't hate other people. But we got to have a mature conversation about race. And that's where Nick is pointing out Dave Smith, the Jewish comedian. Yeah, he's going to let you talk about being critical of Israel, but he's not going to stand up for the white majority in America. Neither is Candace, neither is Tucker, neither is Charlie Kirk. And so all these people who you think are conservative, when you actually press them on, what are you conserving? The GDP and some loose idea that Christianity is good, but so is, there's no difference between Jews and Christians. We're partners in Judeo-Christian beliefs. It's like, well, actually, no, not at all. There is an ethnic component to America, and we have to protect that. So That's just some quick thoughts about that.
That's good. So Joshua, who would you say of those pundits you mentioned? Dave Smith, let's throw in Ian Carroll. You've got Candace Owens, and any of the others that are on the fringes right now that are kind of speaking truth about this, but they're not going to the degree that Nick or you will go. Which are the ones who are not controlled? They're just scared, or they don't know enough, but they're probably the most likely to accept what you are talking about. And let me say my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think Candace is the one who has left her position. She was fired from Daily Wire. Yes, she married a rich European dude, white dude. I get that, which that doesn't bother me. And she has been willing to go the furthest, but I think she is kind of over her skis in terms of like so much has come at her so fast. She's treading water, trying to like figure out, what do I say? What can I not say versus what I know versus what I don't know. And I think people have put her in the camp of, because you've not said enough fast enough, your husband is a, Freemason of the 33rd degree and you're a globalist asshole. You hear me?
Yeah, it's hard to say whether or not she has controlled opposition. She's been helpful in terms of advancing the subject, and she's gone beyond just Israel as a foreign nation. I mean, she talked about Rabbi Shmuley, the butt plug peddling,
because he attacked her.
Yeah, she went after him. But I mean, she also talked about Magnus Hirschfeld, and the origins of Zionism and the pornography industry. I mean, so she's done more than just say the Jewish element is restricted to the behavior of the foreign nation of Israel. She has had some additional commentary in regards to Jewish influence. But you and I saw this happen last year when that created blowback on her that she took it too far. She took it beyond the borders of Israel. They started coming after her, and she had to say, whoa, I'm not saying that it's Jews, all Jews, whatever. It's these Frankist Jews, which is a long detour about the Sabbatinian Frankist Jews, who are a sect of Jews who have this religious belief that they can accelerate the end times by just giving into full-on hedonism, which will further bring about their end times prophecy. And they have infiltrated many governments and media and stuff like that to push forth that type of behavior in society. And then she'll say, it's not all Jews, it's just the Frankist. Or she'll say, it's not all Jews, it's just these highly censorious Jews like Jonathan Greenblatt and the ADL. And it's not all Jews, it's just these hyper-liberal Jews like Rabbi Shmuley, who thinks it's no problem to run a sex toy shop with his daughter. And so the problem is, you start stacking up the number of pockets of Jews. It's not all Jews, but it's also Gloria Steinem and the number of other female Jews and male Jews who pushed feminism. And it's not all Jews, but it's just when you look at who created communism, Marxism and socialism, all pretty much interchangeable. Yeah, like 80 to 90% of the leadership of those movements were Jewish. And this is something Dennis Prager, a Jewish man himself, who runs Prager University, which is actually run by a literal Israeli spy who worked in, was it Division 8200, the intelligence division of the IDF.
Yeah, what's her
Melissa
name?
Strait, I think is her name.
Yes.
That's the CEO of Prager University. And so this is another conservative platform that good old boy honest conservatives say they're standing for the Constitution, and they're fighting for gun rights. Of course, I love Prager University. Well, did you ever see the clip of Dennis Prager talking about how animated child sex pornography is actually not immoral and that it could actually be a benefit for society? Dennis Prager has freely admitted that all of these isms, communism, socialism, feminism, racism, anti-Semitism, are all Jewish creations. And he actually admits this pretty vulnerably and openly. And he says that because the Jewish people as a group are largely secular nowadays, they had to fill that gap of religiosity with something else. They had to be religious about something. And so they have attached themselves to these political ideologies. All the issues around genders, the issues around stratifying the people across different classes and putting them against each other, obviously the races against each other. They have gone all in on these various ideologies because they don't have a God-sized presence in their heart. They're trying to fill up their fulfillment through all of these other social causes. Yeah. And unfortunately, they are all contra to maintaining homogeneity, contra to the nuclear family, and contra to Christian faith. And so you're not going to see Tucker Carlson going out and saying any of this, or Dave Smith, or Ian Carroll, and so on. I think Ian, his situation is a little bit unique because I've watched him for years, back when he was in the shampoo aisle, where like all he was doing was exposing the fact that all of these small independent brands who you're trying to buy because you don't want to get poisoned with all of these P&G products and so on, you think you're buying a small label brand, family-owned local business, and it's actually just owned by one of the mega trillionaire asset managers. Yeah. And so that's how he got famous. And he also got famous on the back of the Robinhood GameStop, that whole stock situation and how criminal it was. And then fast forward several years, suddenly he's talking about the Epstein spy ring. And now he's kind of in over his head on this whole Jewish influence thing where he's wanting to say, I see Israel committing a genocide. I see the Epstein spy ring, child sex trafficking ring, and he sees some other commonalities in Jewish groups, but he isn't willing to actually say Jewish influence as a whole is a problem. It's not every single Jew. We get that. That's not the argument. But group behavior is a real thing, and that can be measured in terms of, is it helping us or harming us? Yeah. And he's not there yet, and neither are any of those other individuals. They're trying to isolate it around a particular conversation. They only want to talk about the Epstein ring, or they only want to talk about the behavior of Israel, and they won't just say, look at every single one of these social ills, the devastation of our economy, all of these wars we've been dragged into over the last 80 years, and even further, if you want to go back to World War I and World War II to orchestrate the creation of Israel. The Jews internationally have been subverting American politics, American media, American education, and American finance for over 100 years.
Let me
and
stop
that's
you
where
there.
we got to get the conversation to.
I hear you're on it. Let me ask you a question though. So at the end of the day, dude, hold on. I'm gonna edit this part. I gotta go. My son is crying. I'll be right back.
I'm gonna pop open a beverage. Smoke if you got them.
Okay.
I said, smoke if you got them.
I heard you. Let me lower my thing here. All right.
Yeah, bring me up a little bit. See the top line of mine is cropped. You got the normal background behind me a little bit.
Actually, on my end, you're perfect.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Yeah. So my question for you, Joshua, is this: whether it's Candace, Tucker, any of the others, and we talked about this early in the show, are they controlled through payment, blackmail, or whatever? Or is this just the natural way of things where they're a little afraid? They don't want to go that far. They don't want to lose their audience. Because I lean toward the latter, unless there's a provable reason that they're, trying to subvert because they're going to, they're paid off or they're blackmailed. RFK is blackmailed, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Candace Owens is new in her Christian faith. She's waffled between, evangelicalism, Catholicism. She landed on Catholicism. She's trying to figure that out. So she's probably not, doing things to subvert because of some secret society from her husband. I think for her, it's more, I'm researching, I'm reading books, I've got a show, I've got a huge audience. I don't want to F any of this up.
There is an important consideration, and I would call it ranks in the army, where not everybody needs to say everything. Okay. And so these subjects are obviously highly controversial, especially if you're talking to Christian Zionists, especially if you're for the first time trying to get white people to actually defend themselves and admit openly that they do actually prefer to be around other white people, not because they have an ill will towards others, but that's just what they're comfortable with. The same way that if you're a Christian, you're going to be most comfortable around other Christians. You don't really want people having loud calls to prayer and walking around barefoot and doing all the other things that the Muslim world would like to do in society. You certainly don't want to adopt hedonism in your society. It's okay to have a preference. You don't nullify your Christianity to have cultural preferences. And when you talk about like Candace Owens, who has millions of followers, for her to go out and potentially blow that up by going so far as to say that Jewish influence as a whole is a problem. It's not just the foreign nation of Israel. It's not just the Epstein spy ring. But we need to talk about the fact that there are too many Jews in too many influential positions in these 4 civil institutions: the media, the government, the finance industry, and education. And the problem is, once you propose that as a problem, people will immediately say, well, what are you supposed to do about it? Are you supposed to set up discrimination laws? Are you supposed to say only X number of Jews are allowed to hold these positions? Are you supposed to go even further and say no Jews can hold those positions? Those are fair questions. But my belief is that we need to have that conversation, because if you want a Christian society and you want to protect a white majority in the country, as awkward and uncomfortable as those conversations are, they have to take place. They're existential. We can't become a minority in our country, and we can't become a religious minority in our country. And we have to just shed this paranoia and fear of conflict and confrontation, political correctness, being called racist, being called anti-Semitic. We got to get over that. Like, we can't continue to be limited to the confines of political correctness. And that's where people like Jeremy and myself have to have the courage to go out there and say, hey, I may not have a multi-million follower like Candace. I may not have multi-millions in the bank like Candace. And so, sure, I have less to lose, but I don't want my children growing up in Sodom and Gomorrah. And I don't want them growing up in Africa/India/Mexico. And so I don't care what you call me. I really don't anymore. I'm trying to do something that is actually valuable. So the ranks in the Army, though, as I said, these conversations are so emotionally provocative that it's okay to have some people introducing people to these topics. And hey, let's just talk about the Epstein spy ring and let somebody else handle the whole thing.
Yeah.
Let's just talk a little bit about who is behind all this immigration. What organizations are funding the mass floods of non-white people, non-Christians into our nation? People can have those conversations in pockets without going all the way, and that's okay. We shouldn't always assume, because they're not talking about the connection between all of these social ills coming from the same least common denominator, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a government employee or that they're being blackmailed or anything like that. But in some cases, it is just obvious. When you look at somebody like Tucker Carlson, whose family is intelligence, who's trotting around the entire globe with direct access to leaders of foreign nations, that's something that is like, okay. And Nick is going to elaborate more on Tucker and his ties to Joe Kent and his ties to JD Vance and JD Vance's ties to Peter Thiel and Palantir. So I'll say one other thing, because I know we have so much more to cover, but the hardest part about Jeremy and I's job is we've invested literally thousands of hours into this research. And there is no way to introduce people to these topics in 20 minutes, not even in 1 hour, not even if you give me 2 hours, not even if I come with stacks of paper of printed out quotes from the people I'm talking about. That's still not enough to get people comfortable. And so it is exposure therapy over time across all of these different connection points and historical milestones, serving up the census data, serving up the surveys of the Christian population, serving up the social studies on the situation with marriage, the promulgation of pornography and who runs that industry, the capture of our media and how they portray all of this anti-white bias, the same thing in our education system. Like I said, it's thousands of hours of education. Like, I've been watching Nick for 3 years, and each show he does is 2 hours long. So like, I've probably watched thousands of hours of just Nick alone. And then there are the documentaries like Europa, which is a 12-hour documentary. And then there's The Greatest Story Never Told, which is another 7-hour documentary, and Hellstorm and many others. And then there's the reading that you can do. These subjects are just so complex that it's okay for some people to talk about slivers of them one at a time. And we shouldn't always attribute the fact that they're not going 100 miles per hour to malfeasance or ulterior motives. I think that's a fair call out.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, in order to overturn the brainwashing takes a long time.
Become famous, and he's going to be the standard bearer of inclusive populist America first. I said, that can't happen. So I said, we have to make this guy lose. In 2022, he lost by 1,000 votes, thanks to our efforts. It's also the case that Joe Kent was a CIA agent for 20 years. Joe Kent was a Green Beret. He didn't even live in America. He lived in the Middle East for 20 years. And Joe Kent recently was nominated to the National Security Council, even though he lost in 2022 and 2024. And he said, Donald Trump nominated him and said, this guy has great experience. He's in the CIA. He's doing all this intelligence work. Joe Kent is a close friend of Tucker Carlson. Joe Kent's wife writes for the Gray Zone, his new wife. His old wife got killed by ISIS. His new wife works for the Gray Zone. Gray Zone is run by Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal is a friend of Tucker. So Joe Kent's wife's publication is run by a friend of Tucker. Joe Kent is a friend of Tucker. And Tucker, Blumenthal, and Joe Kent conspired to write a hit piece about me, 3-part hit piece about me, accusing me of being a Fed. And then the hit piece was shilled on Influenceable. Influencers were being paid money to tweet the article with the hashtag #FedFuentes. Influenceable is a firm that pays right-wing influencers under the table to promote influence campaigns. And one of those campaigns was to call me a Fed and push the article. That was a week after it was published. So Tucker Carlson, whose dad is in the CIA, they're an intelligence family. He's in the CIA. He's involved. He's in Nicaragua during Iran-Contras. He applied for the CIA. He's conducting diplomacy for the United States. He says he loves going to Israel. He's tight with Orban, who's tight with Israel.
Let me say something real quick on the subject
of CIA buddy,
Fuentes.
Joe Kent. Tucker heavily promotes him.
Yeah, go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I covered this in a vlog I dropped this week. This hashtag #FedFuentes, because when I do my work on my social media platform, I post a lot of Nick's content, and inevitably, every single time, whether it's a reel, a post, or a story, I get comments from people saying Nick is a Fed, like clockwork. And what Nick just explained, I already knew because I've been watching Nick's show, and he went over this whole Influenceable campaign. As he explained, Influenceable is a company. They hire influencers for political purposes. So politicians or think tanks or wealthy people hire Influenceable to pay influencers to push a political narrative. They did this last year for a campaign called #FedFuentes. There is a 1-page PDF. You can look it up. It's on my social media, or you can Google it, #FedFuentes. And they give the influencers bulleted talking points of so-called evidence that Nick is a Fed. And he himself has gone through every single one of these bullets on his show, like the fact that he wasn't charged on January 6th. They take his clips from Right Wing Watch, Media Matters, and the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they say, look how anti-Semitic he is. Look how racist he is. Look how misogynistic he is. He's clearly just trying to agitate the people. He's trying to put the races against each other. He's trying to kill all Jews. He's clearly a Fed operative trying to, as I said, agitate the people. So this #FedFuentes came up again last week in the aftermath of Austin Metcalf, the white teenage football player who was stabbed in the heart and died on the scene in Texas, Frisco, Texas, stabbed by another fellow student, some black kid. And this has been all over the newswire over the last week. I don't want to do a full detour on this one subject, but how it relates to Fed Fuentes is Nick talked about this event on his show, and he talked about how, listen, we're tired of these racial double standards where a black kid goes and stabs an unarmed white kid in the heart, murders him, and then he gets bailed out of jail. His family gets hundreds of thousands of dollars donated to his legal defense. The family goes and buys a $150,000 Escalade and starts renting a $900,000 house with this money. And the left is lionizing this as the next George Floyd scenario. Nick has talked about the racial situation for a very long time. It's not new on his show, so he does a special about it. And then you have on Twitter a guy named Jason Whitlock, who many of you may know if you're into the conservative politics commentary world. Jason Whitlock has a show on Blaze TV, which is owned by Glenn Beck, the staunch Zionist, who says he is like a de facto Jew. He wishes he could be a Jew, who has written personal letters to Bibi Netanyahu about how much he loves Israel. Jason Whitlock, as I said, is a black commentator on Blaze TV. He's previously a sports commentator. Nowadays, he likes doing political commentary. He's also been platformed on Fox News. And Nick's monologue about the Austin Metcalf situation was being sliced up and circulated on Twitter. Jason Whitlock responded to that saying, this Nick Fuentes guy is a demon. The way he talks about the races, the way he has such a unapologetic perspective on the fact that whites we should not be tolerating this level of violence. The statistic is very well known. Hopefully you guys aren't hearing this for the first time, but if you are, 6% of the population commit more than 50% of the violent crime, including rape and murder in America. Those 6% are black males. So 6% commits more than 50% of the murders and rapes in this country. 1 out of every 22 black males will, over the course of their lifetime, murder somebody. These are uncomfortable subjects, but they are the FBI crime statistics data. And this is the subject of group behavior, it being a real thing, it differing across racial lines. And we can talk about why this is. We can talk about socioeconomic factors, the legacy of slavery, the way the Jews have used the media, the movies, the recording industries to put forth this toxic culture in black communities. That's all true, but there is a racial component to black communities acting in different ways in regards to violence and theft and property than white communities. For example, if you want to say it's all an income thing, it's all socioeconomic factors, the lowest income bracket of whites commit less crime than the highest income bracket of blacks. It is what it is. And It's been this way for decades. And that's according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And so this is just the stuff that Nick lays out unapologetically, exactly like I am on my show. And so Jason Whitlock goes on the timeline and says, Nick is a demon based on what he has said about the Austin Metcalf thing and that black people are on some level more violent than whites. So Nick responds on his show with, all right, if you want to go here, we can go here. Let's talk about black culture. Let's talk about this victim card where you guys will not accept accountability for your own sons. The fact that everything that we see from the black community is always attributed to what others have done to them. It is never a result of your own cultural practices that 100% mirror the practices of the 50 some odd countries of Africa. And so Nick goes on an hour-long tirade about this is the truth about race. Yes, there are socioeconomic factors, but yes, there is also a racial, biological component, and we need to be mature about discussing that. So then Jason Whitlock responds on his Twitter. He graduates from calling Nick a demon to, guess what? Nick is a Fed. And so this is where you start to see the points coming in, where there is a talking point that is circulated to anybody who has a large platform in the conservative media space to discredit anything Nick says because he is a Fed. his perspectives about the Jews, his perspectives about race, his perspectives about being anti-feminist, his perspectives about being a Catholic, whatever it may be, do not watch his show, is what you're supposed to learn. You can't trust him. He's anti-Semitic, racist, misogynistic, homophobic, all the other words. And on top of all of those ad hominems, he's also a Fed. But then you find out that Fed Fuentes is a literal paid operation through this company called Influenceable. So I just wanted to throw that in there because it's not just Tucker Carlson, and it's not just Joe Kent, and it's not just all of the other pseudo-conservatives who want you to believe that they are the ones who get to draw the line on where the right ends and you can't go further than that. They're the ones who are saying Nick is a Fed, and they're being paid to do that. And this is the reason why. They're trying to keep the conversation limited to what they are comfortable with.
They disavow Nick Fuentes. He's not pro-Israel enough. He's a real racist. He's a real Christian nationalist. They then collaborate with Max Blumenthal, who, by the way, is the son of Sidney Blumenthal, Bill Clinton's hatchet man. Nice little detail there. To call me the federal agent. I'm fake. I don't believe what I'm saying. Tucker Carlson is real. Tucker's the organic guy. Tucker's the organic one. He believes what he says, even though for 20 years he was a libertarian. For 20 years he's a libertarian. Then he gets the primetime show shortly before Trump wins. Now he's a populist nationalist. Yeah, I'm the insincere one. Tucker is pro-Trump for 9 years, except for January 6th when his private text messages say, I hate Trump, he's a demon, I can't wait until we never have to see him again. But I'm insincere, I'm fake, I'm real. Oh, really? Joe Kent, the CIA agent, not a Fed. Tucker, CIA family, dad ran U.S. propaganda, not a Fed. Tucker, who is libertarian bow tie for 20 years, populist nationalist, secretly hates Trump, lies and says he loves him, not insincere. But me, who gave up everything at the age of 18, who at the age of 18 years old got a YouTube show in college and said, you know what? I don't think we should send Israel money. Yeah, I'm the fake one though, right? Tim Pool. Oh, he's legit. Tim Pool getting millions of dollars from Russia. Oh, I knew nothing about that. Tim Pool, who's running Daily Wire's coverage of the election, Daily Wire run by Shapiro, who also hangs out with Netanyahu. Tim Pool hangs out with Netanyahu. Yeah, they're real. I'm fake. And Dave Smith, you know, maybe he's a nice guy, maybe he isn't. Dave Smith is Jewish, and he says the United States is the puppet master. Israel's the puppet. Israel's our satellite. And I'm against racial stuff. I'm just a libertarian, by the way. Yeah, he's the radical. This is your fake dialectic. It's all fake. Yeah, you're right, Tucker. You're right. Something's fake. Someone's not who they say they are. Someone is a fake dissident being paid by the enemy. It's you. It's not me. It's you. You get paid by the enemy. You got $15 million from Rockbridge Institute. You don't think that's public? It's public. It's out there. Joe Kent got $1 million from Peter Thiel. You interviewed Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin at his behest. You got $15 million from Rockbridge, a product of 1789 Institute, founded by, you guessed it, Vance, a creation of Peter Thiel.
Josh,
pause it there.
What is $15 million from Rockbridge?
I don't know that much about Rockbridge. I think that's the institute that JD Vance funded. And I have an entire documentary called JD Vance, the Con Artist, that I highly suggest if you guys want to know more about the fabricated personality that we call JD Vance. That's not even his real name, by the way. I'm trying to decide how much to go into it versus just push you guys to that documentary because it's 40 minutes long and it's footage from Nick along with 100. I provided 100 receipts in this documentary showing the ascendancy of JD Vance's career in the private sector through all of these Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel-backed companies where he had basically no-show jobs, where he would get millions of dollars to hold the role, but at the same time was out there touring the country, doing a roadshow in support of his book, Hillbilly Elegy, which is a manual for anti-whiteism. It talks about how unimpressive and uninspiring white people are. And then he goes and marries an Indian woman. And he even says he explicitly chose to marry an Indian woman because he was so disgusted with Appalachian America.
Hold on. Hold on.
Yeah.
Did you see the film that was made about his life?
No, I think I know what you're talking about. I couldn't bring myself to watch that. I'm sorry.
Well, I watched it because I didn't know anything. And it's a great movie. I mean, a great movie emotionally, as you would expect, right?
I'm sure. Hollywood's good at doing that.
Damn. So you're telling me that his entire life is a fake?
Yes. Yeah, I strongly recommend you guys watch it. JD Vance, The Con Artist. It's on my YouTube. Very well produced. As I said, 100 pieces of news articles.
Hold on. So as a little boy, JD Vance you're not going to deny he grew up in the mountains of Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he grew up there. He's a little boy. And you're going to tell me that it's like everything about him coming to the ascendancy of a vice presidential role, all of it's fake. Everything. He never worked hard, nothing. Come on, man.
I would say 90% of it was financed by people who wanted somebody who could be white first and foremost, because that's how you get the Republican vote. You know, they don't want to admit it openly, but Republicans are still kind of somewhat closet racist. They'll never actually acknowledge it, but they would prefer to see a white president. They would prefer to see a white vice president. And so they wanted, especially in the post-Kamala Harris era, the post-DEI era, to get back to white people in charge. So that was a component of grooming JD Vance. The fact
Which
that
would have been groomed in the 90s.
It started closer in like the 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
The fact that he's a Catholic also panders to Republicans. They're not Catholic necessarily, but they at least like the fact that they have a Christian in the VP spot. I mean, anything, when you look at Kamala Harris, it was like, okay, a white Catholic, sign us up. He says he's against immigration, theoretically, sign us up. And he's against transgenderism and wokeism, sign us up. But the problem is they don't know who gave him the millions of dollars to write his book and pulled him out of the Ivy Leagues, and after a whopping 2 years of political experience as a senator, placed him in the vice presidential seat.
Boom. You nailed it.
Someone's getting paid by the enemy. Someone isn't who they say they are. Someone is fake. Someone's botted. Isn't me. It isn't the 18-year-old college student who in 2017 decided they were going to start criticizing Israel and fucking immolate their life and career. It's not that guy. It's not the guy that's banned from YouTube, which you are still on. The guy that's banned from every social media and payment processor when you're a multi-millionaire. Certainly not that person. What a joke. And you know what? You can't even blame him. You can't hate the player. That's just the game. He's a CIA agent. He's got a fucking badge and a gun, okay? Him and his dad are in the CIA. You can't even blame them. Hey, guess what? Tucker's son, Buckley, got hired by JD Vance. It's a big circle jerk. It's a huge circle jerk. Why does Tucker not want to call me out? Why doesn't he have me on his show? It's sort of interesting. Tucker said, he insinuated that I, like Ray Epps, was an FBI agent that convinced people to go into the Capitol. That's a very popular narrative. Well, it's interesting because when Tucker called out Ray Epps, he called him out by name. When Tucker accused Ray Epps of sending people into the Capitol, he said, that's Ray Epps, and I would have him on my show and debate him and expose him. For some reason, he didn't give me the same courtesy. I wonder why that is. We're going to pile on Ray Epps. We won't say my name. I don't get an invitation to defend. Apparently, you have the proof in the documents. Come and embarrass me, please. Please make my day. Then, if you have all the proof. I wonder why he won't say it. It's because unlike all these other yahoos that go, oh, Tucker, I like his show. He says what we're all thinking. I actually do the research. I actually know who these people are. So, Tim Pool is just such a nothing pissant. No one takes him seriously. He's a whore for money. Everyone knows that now. And he's complaining. Sam Hyde says I got something to do with Israel. Yeah, it's a shame the cool kids don't like you. It's because you're a whore. And look, congratulations. You have 40,000 low IQ voters. You have 40,000 punk rocker, Gen X idiots that you tricked into thinking you're a truth teller. And you make a lot of money. And look, congratulations, whore. Enjoy the money. Enjoy the money, prostitute. You sold your dignity. We'll just get on your knees when they put the
Joshua, how much do you love this?
I love it. But I was trying to decide if I should tell you to pause it or not, because this is the thing. I know your audience is probably skews older, probably skews toward more traditional conservatism and doesn't love crass language.
No,
and so when he says,
they would not love this part.
Right. So when he says, telling Tim Pool to get on your knees and open your mouth when they give you the money, this is one of the reasons Nick doesn't get invited onto mainstream shows, but it's not a serious reason, because if you've actually ever seen the people who are willing to platform him, he does not speak this way when he goes and does interviews.
No doubt.
Never. He puts himself together presentably. He's calm. He's nowhere near as confrontational. That doesn't mean he's like hiding this. I mean, he'll be the first person to say, go watch my show. I am much more restrained when I am actually in conversation because I'm a respectable person. I want to have respectful conversations. So when people watch this and they get a little antsy about he's using some vulgar language, and as I said, it can be a bit crass. I had this experience. I tried to actually show, this is a funny story. Like 2 years ago, I tried to show my dad a clip of Nick's show. And it was all factually true stuff, but he did this impersonation of the Jews. And he's like wonderful, doing the whole shekels and, oy vey impersonations and the Jewish voice. And my dad was like, turn it off. I was like, but listen to what he's saying. He's saying the truth. He's telling you that this person, this date, this time, this is the policy they passed. Here's why we shouldn't appreciate that. But the fact that he has this comical, but also, non-politically correct way of doing so, that doesn't fly well in the older demographic.
No doubt. Let's keep going. We're almost done.
All right.
In your mouth, bitch. You're a fucking whore. You got what you wanted. You're nothing. Tucker, on the other hand, people still think he has credibility. His whole persona's fake. He is not like us. He wears flip-flops. He does this fake laugh. I'm just like you guys. Tucker Carlson is nothing like you or me or any of us. My dad is a working class guy. My dad, when I was born, my dad was working for the tollway. Okay. That's my family. My parents didn't go to college. Your dad was running Voice of America for the CIA at the end of the Cold War. We are not the same. You're wearing flip-flops when you travel to Saudi Arabia and gas them up about how modern they are. You wear flip-flops to your meeting with the head of the United Arab Emirates, who you say is the smartest man in the world. He is nothing like us. Oh, you think that, what do you think? When Tucker's in Buenos Aires interviewing Javier Milei, who's an obvious cutout for the CIA in Israel, you think he interviewed him because he's a really interesting guy? Tucker's a bon vivant, international traveler. He just loves to be on vacation. That's why he's in every foreign capital every other week. That's why he's interviewing all of the CIA's favorite people, because he loves to travel. I'm in my flip-flops. I just decided to go to Argentina. Oh, yeah. Fuck you, cocksucker, fucking Fed. You call me a Fed? You're in Buenos Aires in your flip-flops promoting Malay so we could take over the river and we could take over the lithium. Yeah, Tucker visited, and then on the heels of flip-flops Tucker, on the heels of his flip-flops, was William Burns, Laura Richardson, and Anthony Blinken. I'm sure that was a coincidence. I'm sure that typically people that are just fun-loving truth tellers, that are just a little silly and goofy, I'm sure they're usually followed in tow by William Burns, Laura Richardson, and Anthony Blinken. A very, very normal person, just like us.
All right, Joshua. So what's the truth on Tucker? Is it like Nick Fuentes says, where he is a Fed with a badge and a gun, and he's got to play a role? Because if he doesn't, he'll get killed or he will not stop being paid. Or this is what I believe. This is more organic. He got let go by Fox News when he started, telling truths about 9/11 and JFK. And yes, I mean, he'll lose relationships and all that if he continues to push forward with truth on Israel, whatever. But it's more organic in the sense of like he's simply afraid of losing millions of followers if he goes too hard on a subject that we, as guys with 10,000, 100,000 followers, we're not as afraid to lose. I think it's the latter.
Disagree. No. He's been controlled from the start. From him getting the position right before, remember, like Nick said, he was a full-on libertarian before Trump's presidency. And so he was installed just in time for the America First, what we thought that was supposed to mean, in order to make sure that that was controlled to not become a full-on white ideology or anything related to tying Christianity to our national identity too aggressively. And to obviously not allow any conversation around the fact that as soon as Trump got in office, he immediately started taking money from Israel, even though he said he wasn't going to do that. And he had to pretend to support Trump while, as Nick mentioned, secretly hating Trump because he is still a libertarian. He is a paid actor. He is a Project Mockingbird actor. Probably the best example of it.
So if he's paid off, he's not even a libertarian. He's just whatever he's paid to be.
Yeah, like I said, Project Mockingbird. He's given a political set of bullet points that he has to protect on air. And so in my opinion, when he left Fox News, that was not, oh man, he's starting to get a little too spicy for mainstream news. We got to get him out of here.
I thought that totally at the beginning because I was following him closely 3 months prior to him getting let go. He was hitting on JFK and 9/11 and who did it. And he even mentioned Israel as a part of that conversation. And then he got let go. So I don't think human beings, as we see them in politics today, are smart enough to say, oh, we're going to play this game. If it is a game, I think it was them playing artificial intelligence.
Well, the reason I say it's a game is because he was dispatched to be the borderline on right politics on X. Because they coincided. Once Elon took over, that overlaps with him being ousted from Fox News. So he's supposed to go and protect the first.
Two,
like any one of us, right?
One, go.
All right. So the question was Tucker Carlson and whether or not his departure from Fox News was because he was becoming too transgressive, divulging too many sensitive truths. I think he was dispatched to go and protect the furthest right boundary line on X, knowing that theoretically Elon was going to say this is now a free speech absolutist platform. They needed a huge conservative, trusted individual with a lot of brand power to go and under this whole narrative of, hey, I'm a real truth teller. Okay. I'm so real that even Fox News won't handle me. And so he gets put onto X as Nick Fuentes mentioned, financed to the tune of $15 million from Peter Thiel and JD Vance to go and stand up this whole new persona as super controversial, far more than you'll ever see on Fox News, and still won't stand up for white identity and still won't identify Jewish influence writ large, not just the nation of Israel. And anything beyond that, Tucker will always remind you that he's not a racialist. He doesn't think that that's okay. He thinks that those are real white supremacists. Those are the real Nazis.
Okay.
Those are the real anti-Semites.
I see where you're coming from. But let me ask you this. If that's the truth, why wouldn't they just censor Lucas Gage now, or Sam Parker, or even me, for platforming those guys on my own show on X?
I don't mean for this to sound bad, Jeremy, because nearly 100,000 followers is a very large platform. But if it gets to the point of 500,000, a million, and so on, I think that's when you're going to start seeing more pressure. And God bless you. I want you to get that far, not because I want that blowback for you, but because I want you to get the message out there. I want that for all of us. Like, look at what's happening with Andrew Tate. He's actually, in my opinion, even though his father was also in the CIA, he is, strangely enough, advocating explicitly for white majority in America, talking about Jewish influence as a whole. He's also doing the third thing that you're not allowed to talk about, which is fully rebuking modern feminism, the crypto feminism of even conservative women calling themselves anti-feminist. And he's still saying, you're still feminist, trust me. So Andrew Tate having the millions and millions of followers that he does, that's why you see a huge backlash against Andrew Tate and not against Tucker Carlson. The only people complaining about Tucker Carlson are leftists with purple hair and Black Lives Matter protesters, right? Like, nobody cares. But a lot of people, institutional power, Governor DeSantis, entire states of America come after Andrew Tate because he's actually saying America is a white country and American Christians need to man the fuck up and defend their faith. And Jewish influence is real. And so that's why Andrew Tate has perpetual lawsuits every single year and was nearly barred from entering the United States.
Makes sense. Let's finish this out.
So it's all fake. And listen, I didn't start this, okay? I didn't start barking up this tree until they came after me. I was part of the deception. Or I was persuaded by the deception, in the sense that if you go back and watch my show, I supported Tucker. I said, I don't know about Tucker. He seems like he might be on our side. Maybe not. So I was tricked by the deception. I didn't start barking up this tree because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. People say I have beef with everybody because I'm just a big jerk. I'm a big jerko. I didn't know. It didn't start that way. I didn't know what was going on with Tucker. Then I get a call from a friend of a friend that Tucker is calling Michelle Malkin, a close friend of mine, and saying, I think Nick Fuentes brainwashed Ye into being an anti-Semite. And all the stuff that I know is not true. All the stuff that is on the record not real. Anyone will tell you that's not true. Anyone that knows him will tell you that's not true. I started barking up this tree when I had Anya Parampil calling me up about her 3-part hit piece, and she didn't even know the first thing about me, and she published it anyway. With her husband, who's Bill Clinton's, the son of Bill Clinton's hatchet man, in collaboration with Tucker, after Joe Kent disavowed me over nothing. And I started barking up this tree with Peter Thiel and Bronze Age Pervert after Bronze Age Pervert was following every single slander and lie about me going back to 2019. And I said, wait a second, something's not right here. And then we figured out what each and every one of them were up to, who their mentors were, who their parents were, who funds them. And you find out, someone's the Fed. Peter Thiel talks to Costin Alamariu. Peter Thiel's an FBI informant and a CIA contractor. And he funds you through the Abigail Adams Institute. You didn't think we knew about that? We know all about that. We know all about that, my friend. We know all about that. And you call me the Fed? Fuck you. Anyway, so that's that. But I want to move on. It's a little, and the reason I get heated about it is because you know, if they were honest, they would just say they're liberal. If they were honest, you know, they just say, look, we like diversity. We like gay people. We like feminism. We like our big gay liberal democracy full of brown people. They would just be honest. And they would get crucified in the battle of ideas because we are right and they are wrong. But they know they can't say that. They have to keep up appearances, which is they are me. I am telling the truth. I have all this organic popularity. They have to sound like me, but they're not like me. And the existence of me is uncomfortable for them because it proves that they are fake. So they have to say in this battle, who will the real America first please stand up? They have to say, that guy, he's not real. We won't say his name. We won't even say his name. We won't say his name. We won't do a show with him for these reasons. We won't debate him because he killed me in Grand Theft Auto, because he made fun of my show, because he made fun of my wife, because he called me a CIA agent, even though I am. He doesn't exist. He's Qatari funded. He's a bot. He's FBI. He's SPLC. That's how they have to. Cass Sunstein wrote the playbook. We know it. This is what they're doing. This is the game. So anyway, I would love to talk to Alex Jones about what he meant by that at some point. You know, Tucker said that. Tucker won't have me on. And I know Alex Jones. I'm curious what he meant by that. I'm curious if I am who he was referring to, because I've known him a long time. It'd be nice to get the benefit of the doubt. I've known the guy for 10 years. And between the two of us, you know, one of us went down the tubes for January 6th. And I'm not saying he's had any shortage of hardship. He's had a tough go, but you know, somebody got their money frozen. Somebody got put on a no-fly list. It wasn't him. He's got other problems, but it's interesting. So I wonder what he meant by that. I almost don't even want to say, because I don't want to put my life in jeopardy. But one of these days, we're going to have to just put it all on paper and do a succinct video about all this, because all this information I've just given you, I mean, it might be hard to follow. You know, hardly anybody knows this background information, but the truth needs to get out there. This is fake. This is a fake conversation. And I feel like I'm the only one that's smart enough to really penetrate this discourse, to really cut through it, because a lot of people just don't even know.
All right. So Nick Fuentes, he might be the only guy that's smart enough and bold enough and has the margin in his life to penetrate the conversation of truthfulness when it comes to this particular topic, which seems to have its tendrils in everything. Josh, he got kicked off of interview mode. We can't bring him back on. Follow Josh at Beholden to Truth on Instagram. Follow him on beholdentotruth.com, beholdentotruth.com, X, Instagram, and beholdentotruth.com. Great dude. Knows his stuff. Unafraid. Bold. Loyal. I love you guys. Take from this conversation what you will, and I will see you soon. Very soon.